Hey friends, welcome back. So a new analysis finds that red meat intake is actually linked with greater life expectancy, and low meat intake is linked with increased deaths in children. We're going to talk about a review of 175 different countries. The title of this paper is Total Meat Intake is Associated with Life Expectancy, a cross-sectional data analysis of 175 contemporary populations. So we did a live video about this. I will link that here several weeks ago, but I think it's important to further break down the findings of this study and talk about the implications, because as you know, Harvard recently came out with a epidemiological study comparing data from the health professional follow-up study and the nurses' health study, trying to make the claim, attempting to make the claim that meat intake is somehow linked with increased risk of diabetes. And as we talked about in that study, a major flaw therein in that epidemiological study was the baseline characteristics of the study populations, and they put people into different buckets or cohorts. This was quintiles, and it turns out that the people that consume more red meat compared to people that consume red meat diets actually exercised a lot less and smoked a lot more and had a stronger family history of type 2 diabetes. And that probably explains why in those cohorts we saw a greater prevalence of diabetes over time compared to the people who ate low red meat diets. They exercised a lot more and smoked a lot less and had a lower family history of diabetes. But I think this analysis is really good, and I think it's just another helpful tool, when you're talking with people and they say, well, didn't you hear that red meat causes diabetes? Or didn't you hear that red meat or meat intake in general causes all these different diseases? Well, as this analysis found, that wasn't the case. But the shortcomings of this analysis, which essentially is, if we look at here, and I'll share this with you on the screen, this is going to be figure 1. You can see the plot on figure 1 is going to show the countries that have the highest meat intake actually have the longest living people compared to countries who have low meat intake. And if you also look at childhood mortality, countries that have low meat intake have the highest childhood mortality compared to countries that have the highest meat intake. And so we're going to continue to talk about why this might be and how they got their data. Well, essentially they got their data from aggregate analysis from the World Health Organization, as well as country available statistics on meat intake in those different populations. But I do want to throw this out there. There were some outliers. And so if we look here, if you look at total meat intake and life expectancy in Africa, in the Americas, in Europe, and the East Mediterranean. The only outlier here where there's a U-shaped curve was Southeast Asia. But even if you look at the West Pacific, there is a linear and positive association between total meat intake and longevity or mortality. But the only outlier here is Southeast Asia. And I think that is quite interesting. But before we continue on, friends, I just want to say thank you for being here. I appreciate your likes, your comments, your shares. If you know someone who may benefit from this information, please share this with them directly as a text message. That goes a long way to support the continuation of this information and sharing these science-based videos. Also, since we're talking about meat, a nutrient that's found in meat that you may not be getting enough of, but it may help your exercise performance, is creatine. At Myoscience, we created a really novel creatine-containing electrolyte. It features 2.6 grams of creatine along with real salt, magnesium, taurine, and potassium. This is a really unique intra-workout and pre-workout that's caffeine-free, that has over 700 reviews over at Myoscience. People are getting great results when pairing this with exercise or sauna therapy. So if you're going in the sauna or exercising and you're not yet using the electrolyte sticks, check out the reviews, see what other people like you are saying over at myoscience.com. Over 700 reviews. We have a powder version in a stick pack, and then there's a 45 serving jar if you like to exercise a lot. Again, you can save with the code podcast at checkout. So let's go back and talk about the various controversies when it comes to meat intake and protein intake. This is probably the most, next to fat. Protein is very controversial. There's a lot of people that say, well, the centenarians, the different parts of the world, the blue zones, they eat low meat diets. Well, if you look at folks in Sicily and parts of Italy, 50% of their calories actually come from dairy, from yogurt, from cheeses, from meats, from milk products. And so there is a wide variation in protein intake in different parts of the world. But people that have a bias like to point out the fact, well, that it's all the plant matter, and it's all the whole grains, it's all the vegetables that these people are eating, but it could be the physical activity. These blue zone regions, people are around there, they walk to work, they walk to friends' houses, they have very physically active jobs. But why is it now that we're so concerned about the fact that meat was problematic when, as the scientists say, going back about 9 to 11,000 years ago, before agriculture was introduced, human ancestors could not grow, harvest, store the majority of plant-based products that are now staple foods. Plant foods were most accessible only in particular seasons of the year. Contrariwise, animals, including large game, small animals, fish, and some insects, could constantly provide energy for humans, with meat as a staple food. So humans have been eating protein and insects and animals for millions of years. It wasn't until the advent of modern agricultural techniques dating back to 9 to 11,000 years ago that we started to have more whole grains, and if any of you have tried to grow vegetables before, I have a garden. I have about 400 square feet in my backyard dedicated to growing vegetables. We have rats, we have rabbits, we have insects, we have birds, all trying to get after the vegetables that we're growing. And I'm not saying that I don't enjoy growing vegetables or eating them, but it's very hard, even in a controlled environment with, different irrigation strategies and using netting. I love blueberries, like many of you do. Birds love blueberries too. So if you didn't have galvanized fencing and netting, I don't even know how you'd eat a lot of berries unless you are foraging in the high alpine mountains and getting them, in late July, August, and early September. So it's interesting because these population studies, particularly the Seventh-day Adventist studies, have shown that vegetarians tend to have greater life expectancy compared with non-vegetarians. However, lack of population representativeness and failure to remove influences of lifestyle factors in these studies have been criticized because we look at a different population and say, see, they eat a low protein diet, they eat a low meat diet, so therefore meat is a problem. But we're not accounting for the fact that they have good social structures, family structures, religiosity and spiritual practices, as well as exercise and other lifestyle factors that are probably moving the pendulum more so than just the composition of their diet. And so it's been suggested that a lot of folks in the academic community just take this for face value, suggesting that a vegan diet or vegetarian diet improves longevity. But we now know this is to be questioned because several recently published studies with large sample sizes, both in the UK and also Australia, do not show that meat eating correlates negatively with life expectancy. And so that's why we have this analysis. And actually, I want to thank the lead author here for reaching out to me. This was conducted by folks in Australia as well as Switzerland. And again, they're using statistics from various parts of the world, 175 contemporary countries, finding that meat intake is actually positively correlated with life expectancy, and low meat intake is negatively correlated with child life expectancy, meaning that countries that have really low red meat diets in general have higher death rates in children, and they have higher death rates and shorter lifespans. So I think it's important to acknowledge that we have an imperfect science here. We have multiple factors affecting longevity, like these different blue zone regions, exercise, spirituality, lifestyle. And so we can't just look at one factor. We need to look at all the different factors. And I think it's important to acknowledge this body of work by these scientists finding, again, that meat intake, about 138 grams per day. That's what they looked at. The different countries that are characterized by high meat intake countries, they have the greatest life expectancy and the lowest childhood mortality. Now, I think we know this to be true, especially when it comes to the low childhood mortality. Many people that have been vegan or vegetarian for most of their life, when they get pregnant, guess what? They know they should start eating fish and red meat. Moms inherently know this because they know that fish and red meat have nutrients that plants do not. So many people, I'm sure you've had friends or family members that were vegan or vegetarian and they get pregnant and they start eating meat. So you might say, well, why are you doing that? Because they inherently know. Their body is telling them that there are nutrients in these foods that are inherently healthy, particularly when you're growing a newborn child in your body. The heme iron, the B12, the folate, the creatine, the taurine, these things are not found in plants. So why would we assume that if you completely avoid or omit these critically important micronutrients in your diet, that you're going to be healthy as an adult and will somehow live longer? I think there's a lot of confusion when it comes to the quality of the meat, processed versus unprocessed, how it's cooked and how it's raised. All these things are important questions that people should ask, but Suffice it to say, there's very little evidence to suggest that intentionally going on a low meat or low protein diet will somehow help you live longer. I think the evidence now really supports the contrary. So friends, that's it for today's show. Hopefully you enjoy this video and these images and a quick breakdown of this study. If you want a much deeper analysis, we did a live that I'll post right there, and we broke down some paragraphs and the statistical analysis from this study, but just wanted to share it with you here again because I think it's very important and pertinent, because we're going to be sitting around the Thanksgiving table soon, eating some protein, hopefully, and Christmas and the holidays, and these topics come up, and it's helpful to have research at your fingertips that you can verbalize and put language to with your friends and family to encourage them to make healthier nutrition choices to prevent the four horsemen, as Dr. Peter Attia talks about: cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, as well as cognitive decline, including dementia and Alzheimer's. And so we have a lot of control over our trajectory of contracting those illnesses with our diet. So make the right choices, my friends. As always, appreciate you being here. Appreciate your likes, your comments, and we'll catch you on a future video down the road.